Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. Today we will be talking about a week for the history books with my special guest, Thomas Hira. Thomas, welcome
up?
to the show. Thomas, this is, I think, the third time you've been on the show. You and I have become really close friends behind the scenes. You've been super supportive. You are the host of your own podcast, Broken Class with Thomas Hira. And, you know, I had you back on in a short window. You were on November 7th, and we did an episode about the election recap. And because of this last week was kind of the end of the 2020 election officially with the Georgia runoffs, I felt like we could finish the job. We had some discussions. We weren't really sure the full direction of the balance of power at that time. And so I wanted to have you back on so that we could discuss what we see is going to happen moving forward. Now that was Tuesday.
It was. That was before things really hit the fan. Although the writing was on the wall in terms of some very serious and almost certainly violent stuff to occur on Wednesday at the nation's capital. You did mention we've become quite good friends, and I think that what that really in the brass tacks of things means is that we have been able to use one another to just like DM and process wild things that have constantly been occurring in the recent ether. So I'm grateful to be back on the show to discuss what really needs to be discussed and properly understood, in terms of a really historic and tragic moment in American history. Yeah.
The irony of this whole situation is we've never been in the same room, and I have no idea how tall you are. So I'm going to
4'10".
Perfect. No. So now talking about DMs and the community in Lane County, I want to say one thing that I'm super grateful for that I didn't know could be possible from this podcast is some of the people that I've networked with. Some people you've kind of given me leads, and some people vice versa. It's really cool when on election nights that I'm getting text messages from people on city council in Springfield, and I'm getting text messages from people like you who ran for office. And I just think 2 years ago, I started this thing from scratch with just like, what am I going to do? And I'm pretty freaking proud of it, to be honest. So I just wanted to say that it's pretty fun.
Absolutely should be. It's made a lot of inroads in terms of something I care about deeply.
Yeah,
especially in the local journalism across the country is really struggling, and we're seeing lots of relics of that here. Just a quick example: Register Guard is no longer going to print their papers in Eugene, having to outsource it to Vancouver, Washington. And anyway, just the point being that people should be well informed by people who care about their communities and are close with their communities and are doing a real effort to spread information. So I commend you for that for sure.
I'm definitely always hesitant, and I say this a lot, to call myself a journalist, because I want people to, what I'm trying to do is kind of spark the conversation. I want people to kind of do their own research. And I know that can be dangerous, and we're going to get into that. But anyway, we have so much to talk about, so let's get to it. We're going to start with Tuesday, the Georgia runoff. This was huge. One of the things I want to talk about, and you can actually explain this a little bit because it happened in your situation. Now a mayor's race and a Senate race, the rules are completely different. For one, mayor's race is supposed to be nonpartisan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a nonpartisan seat. So the way the primary process works and all that is a little different than a Senate race. And then each state has their own laws. Before we get into the results, I had a couple people asking questions. Shout out to Matthew Hewlett, one of my sponsors from Hewlett Artistry. He had a question about why are we doing this? Like, why are we doing the Georgia runoff on Tuesday? Which I think is a very valid question, because there's a lot of people that just don't understand the process because it's wonky and confusing. I've done an episode about this in the past with Sarah Wolf about the difference between plurality voting versus majority voting. And in the Georgia runoff, there was multiple candidates in each race. This is the way that I've understood it. And Georgia state law requires a plurality. So a majority would be if you get just the most votes. Mm-hmm. A plurality would be if you get 51%. Is that correct?
That's actually, I believe you flipped it.
Did I flip it?
Yes, a plurality is the greatest total. So it could even be 20% in a huge jungle primary, but could be 49%. The plurality is the person who finishes with the most votes in the pool.
Okay.
A majority is like one vote more than 50%.
Okay, I got it backwards. Yeah, right. See, this is, I don't even know.
It doesn't even have to be 51%. It could be 50.001%. You know, that is a majority.
Right. And then a lot of times, you know, if something is within 0.5%, then it can go to an automatic recount, you know, or, you know, if they ask for it or whatnot. So yeah, so the runoff was because the elections were so close, no one got the plurality. And so
the majority.
The majority,
no more than 50%. Correct.
Sure. Okay.
That was especially true in the Reverend Warnock versus Kelly Loeffler race, where they had a huge number of candidates. Warnock finished in first in that race, but it was really unsure how it would go when it was just down to a sitting U.S. senator, Republican, versus this pastor who had never run for office before. Whereas Jon Ossoff did not finish first in his race against David Perdue, and later was able to close that gap.
Yeah, and as a 33-year-old candidate, Jon Ossoff was young, new to the scene. You know, Perdue has a family history in politics, and so its name recognition was there. So that was sometimes having a little bit more time. I know
a guy whose dad had been the governor of the state, so a very well-known name, lost to a person who was a documentary filmmaker. That's very exciting to me because I love movies.
Well, yeah, and then you know, just seeing representation too. Warnock being obviously African American reverend, Ossoff being Jewish. You know, I mean, it's a pretty big deal. Now, you know, I was going to say real quick about late momentum in races. We might not even be as hyper focused on this if Mitch McConnell would have lost Kentucky, because he's someone that will wield that power very, you know, with an iron fist. But Booker in that race, he was making momentum in the primary, and there was just a little bit too little too late to unseat the favorite in that, and then she just didn't have enough. Amy McGrath didn't have enough to unseat Mitch McConnell. So these things, I mean, sometimes it's like the best momentum a candidate gets is at the very, very tail end, you know, of the race. And it's just unfortunate when people are like, man, I wish I would have known about that person. But sometimes getting that name recognition, we see it with Stacey Abrams. I think Stacey Abrams. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, I know you said that we have a lot to cover, and we do, and I'm happy to do that. But that's such an interesting race that you brought up. I didn't expect to think about really was, you know, Amy McGrath had run before for something, and she, I believe that's true. It could be wrong, but she had basically had this national infrastructure of a lot of donation from all around the country. And honestly, the tack that she sort of chose to run in many ways was pro-Trump, anti-Mitch McConnell strategizing in Kentucky to try to win statewide, was to point out the ways in which she didn't feel McConnell had honored Trump's agenda or had stood in his way in situations. And Charles Booker had run a very unabashedly progressive wing sort of campaign. I was kind of glad to see Andrew Yang was really supporting it, but really being out there for Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and those kinds of young and very ardently progressive left policies. And the bummer was that, you know, a lot of down to November, you know, a lot of people would continue to donate from across the country, but Amy McGrath's problem was not a lack of money. You know, she had a plethora of money. You know, we could go into what the issues were with her getting elected. I thought she smoked McConnell in the debate, though. I got to give her props for that. Just like I thought Jamie Harrison smoked Lindsey Graham in the South Carolina Senate race.
Those two races, Jamie Harrison, I was so bummed because you can just, from everything I've seen of Jamie Harrison, the character, and Jamie Harrison was running against Mitch McConnell in South Carolina. So if you're not familiar
against Lindsey Graham, correct? Yeah.
What did I say?
Mitch McConnell. It's okay.
Everyone's running against Mitch McConnell.
Well, I think this speaks to the fact, I don't want to talk over you too much, I apologize, but it speaks to the fact that the House and the Senate, our U.S. Congress, are such seniority-based institutions that the incumbent can really make a compelling and convincing argument to their constituents that, you know what, you might really like this person. You might think they're young. They really have a fresh face, and they are interested in the policies that you are most idealistic about. However, look at how much power I have in this institution. Look at how much respect I have for my colleagues, which is relationships it takes a while to earn. Look at how I have literally, become a ranking member or a committee leader in positions where, I'm sorry, but if you get this person in, they're going to take 10 years, 20 years to get to the power I have now. So it's a difficult situation to get those kinds of insurgent candidates in there.
Yeah. And I mean, in Georgia, I feel like the Democratic Party did the right thing. I don't know exactly how that works as far as the candidates deciding to run or the motivation or the support they get from the party, because what we saw in Kentucky with Amy McGrath is that the party was so behind her right off the bat. I was seeing Facebook ads a year before the election. I live in Oregon. I'm seeing ads for the Kentucky race. I donated $5. At one point.
I got mail from Amy McGrath.
And so they were flooding it. They were putting so much money into it. And I understand why, because Mitch McConnell has so much power in the Senate, being the Senate majority leader. He has so many bills that have been brought to his desk that he would never even consider allowing a vote on, which, I mean, it's disgusting. We do have a ton to cover. So the Georgia runoff, the fact that Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff won means that now we have a 50-50 split in the Senate. Kamala Harris, as the incoming vice president, will make all deciding votes, for tie votes. And so we're going to actually see a Democratic government. We're going to actually see the Democrats running things at least for 2 years. I know Warnock's seat, because it's only 2 years in Georgia. He has to rerun because it was. Do you? I hate to admit this. I do not know why the seat was vacant. Do you know?
Traditionally, a U.S. senator's term is 6 years, so that's huge, right? So basically, one time you run in a presidential year, the next time you run in a midterm year in between a presidential term, etc. And Kelly Loeffler had been appointed by Brian Kemp, the governor, who actually believed that she would do well in the suburbs when she would have to run for the remainder of the term in 2020. But basically, a seat had opened up there, and he appointed her because that's what a governor is allowed to do under our rules. And the term would end in 2022. It's still going to end in 2022, but it's Mr. Warnock who will be able to serve that term. Very exciting for a whole number of reasons. I mean, the current pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. Martin Luther King came to such prominence, and also let's talk about representation, right? Like, people might not particularly realize how rare it is for an African American leader to be elected to the United States Senate. Still, he's like, absolutely. You got basically Obama, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and the first woman to do it was Carol Moseley Braun, and then like 3 other people who have ever been elected.
Tim Scott, right? I mean,
Tim Scott, yep, absolutely, also from South Carolina. And so there have been a few who made it into the Senate without having been elected, like in the 1800s. But I looked at the list on Wikipedia, and it's just a short list, and you got 100 people there all the time. So it's just, I know that not everybody. Maybe, hopefully, people listen to this who do not think I'm not promoting their view because I don't believe in it, but hopefully you have a wide enough span of audience where some people are very excited about diversity and representation, and some people are a little more skeptical of just being excited about a person based specifically on their identity and wanting more to see that their policies and their background is in line with what the person wants fought for. But that we should get to a point where it's a real representative sample of the country. So I'm very excited.
You and I have talked about this quite a bit about just representation, and you telling me just about television growing up when you would see Asian Americans or Asians in general Asian Americans mostly, because American shows for American audiences, but there was kids that were of Asian descent. You said it meant a lot to you, and then it was like, oh my God. And, and so that it's just, when you don't see that, you don't feel like you feel like you live on an island, or whatever. You're like, I just don't, maybe I'm not like everybody else, and so the representation really is huge. I did mention,
we're talking about the same state where Stacey Abrams almost became the first Black woman to ever be the governor of a U.S. state. It has not happened.
Yeah, see, right there. I mean, that right there has never happened, as far as a governor appointment, I talked about it last episode, but Alex Padilla will be replacing Kamala Harris in California and is going to be the first Latinx senator in the state of California's history, which is insane considering the representation, needed to reflect the community in California. I mean, I don't know the percentages, but California is a massive Latinx community, so that should be interesting. I don't know a ton about his politics and whatnot, and we'll find out more as moving forward, but obviously, they gave the nod and there was a lot of really, worthy people, and I have no complaints about the pick as far as now. So the Georgia runoff is going to be really big, or the 2 seats. It's a big deal. It's the first time that a Democrat has won Georgia since 2000, and we got 2 of them. And, there's a lot of celebration going on. And I think Facebook feeds, and we're going to talk a lot today about social media, but Facebook has gotten so one-sided. I wonder sometimes how many people saw my snarky little bragging, my celebratory snark about the runoffs, because I don't know how many people I have that are extremists anymore. I've got some friends, I'm sure, on my feed that are moderately conservative or whatnot, that are like, they roll their eyes when I post things, but I just don't really get a lot of flack anymore because I've blocked everybody that's an asshole. So we live in our bubbles and it's really weird. Now,
I heard, because we will get into social media, censorship and what is considered free speech and what's considered First Amendment, and the roiling conversation about that right now. But I was listening and finding out on the radio that Facebook did some of their own research about, because on the topic of extremism and how it can breed. And basically the way that Facebook started out being very idealistic about connecting people. And then my Marxist friends will basically say, like, capitalism poisons everything. And what I'm just saying is that the business model eventually kind of demanded that they focus so much on increasing engagement that was what the algorithms wanted to do. And so keeping you on the platform as long as possible, getting you mad, getting you, to think like, addicted to the platform. And their own research showed that in 2/3 of the times when a user would join an extremist group, it was because the algorithm recommended it to them, Wow. Which doesn't surprise me. That tends to be how I don't search out an interesting sounding group and think, I really would love to be in a group of Patty Rose supporters today. It tends to be that it comes up and I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, homeboy's in there.
Like
let's do it.
Yeah, an invite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did go on the Illuminati's Facebook page one time, just out of curiosity. I didn't follow it, but I searched for it. And man, it's some pretty wild stuff.
There's some rightful celebration right now about the fact that finally there's some accountability for this person in the office who has just disgraced what the norms are, or just our values surrounding what is safe and what is fair and what makes sense to promote from the highest office in the land, right? So there's some celebratory, like, woohoo, like Jack Dorsey at Twitter, like really, really got him, But let's also have in the conversation enough space to say, yeah, these people helped get Trump elected. These people are responsible in many situations for why Trump was able to win the Republican primary with his Twitter account in the first place. And so, yeah, thank goodness that, and then they were so transparent about warning the guy, like, okay, bro, if you don't delete these tweets after your 12-hour ban, like, sorry, like, some serious consequences are going to get handed down from us. And now what I would like to see is some kind of formal consequence handed down in the government structure, in the public sector, and not just in the private sector. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you about what the implications of that could be, because
it's going to be
a difficult debate.
So we're going to talk more about social media in a bit, but I want to talk about what led to some of the social media platforms blocking Trump. So we talked about Tuesday with the runoffs. Wednesday, in this week for the history books, the Capitol building breach, and a lot of people knew that this was coming. There's been a lot of warnings. We talked about already about our bubbles and kind of our circles. So I'm not on Parler. I'm not sure about you, but I haven't seen too much of the talk about, let's storm the Capitol, other than people sharing maybe a screenshot here and there. And I'm not in any of those groups, but apparently this is a very widespread thing. And that day, I mean, I want to talk first about just what the emotions of it were. I was at work and my girlfriend starts texting me stuff like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. They've, Trump protesters have just breached the Capitol building. And then, later, oh my gosh, they're in Nancy Pelosi's office. And I definitely was having a hard time focus. And then coming home and watching the news literally all night long, I realized how it was very disturbing. And it kind of made me rethink the way that I've looked at some of the stuff that's happened in Portland. I got to be completely honest that, I don't know what would have happened if the protesters in Portland would have gotten in. Now we can talk about the balance of the way that policing is done. I mean, in Portland, they dealt with that with the swiftness. They're literally detaining people without, identifying themselves as federal agents. I mean, just insane. And these are 20-year-old kids. Not that that's still an adult, at 20, whatever. But these people that are doing this in DC are, a lot of them, I mean, I'm sure it's a wide range of individuals, just like any other protest. But gosh, it's
interesting to consider too, Patty, the difference between trying between, and I actually, I wouldn't defend every single action in Portland. I certainly would not. But trying to get into the Mark Hatfield Justice Center as a symbol of what the criminal justice system has stood for and continues to perpetuate against Black Americans, for example, compared to trying to storm the U.S. Capitol, which is a symbol of representative democracy, right? The place where people convene from all around the country who have been duly elected to carry out their constitutional duties. It's a different thing.
Yeah. And part of me says, I'll admit that some of when I say that, like I rethink about Portland, like there's this desire to make concessions. There's this desire to kind of meet in the middle and like a plea to the, we'll just say other side. It's like, look, guys, like, I know you're going to be like, what about Portland? So I'll concede that. When does it become a point where we're just like, you're not willing to budge? So you know what? Fuck you. Like what's happening is unacceptable, because we're in this position where I constantly want to concede. I want to throw those Amy McGrath candidates out there. I'm using that as an analogy, but it's just, you want to try to find ways to work together. And that's literally my desire. But at the same time, we're dealing with people that you've had Mitch McConnell on the right before Wednesday saying that the Biden election was fine, that there was no sign of voter fraud. So you have far right conservative elected officials saying that this was a fair election. And yet, because of misinformation, you have people believing that it's time to completely overthrow the entire United States government. And that was their goal. Right. That was their goal, and we haven't seen the last of it. I mean, I think it's January 17th, and if not January 20th, because like I said, I'm not in those threads, but I keep seeing more and more and more about creating a new America, a new 1776 party where they're going to overthrow the United States government. I mean, what in the hell is going on? And
right.
I mean, these people, and then,
well, one thing that strikes me, go.
Just because with a lot of the motivation now is wrapped up with COVID shutdowns and all that kind of stuff. And so I understand people's complaints and gripes, but why is it that when the COVID complaints happen, that it's literally like an underlying suggestion that it's just from the Democratic Party that's doing shutdowns? Like this is what so like these people will be like, well, they're trying to take away my business. I'm like, all government is modifying our rights right now. It's not like it's left or right. It's government because we're in a public health crisis. And
I have a gradient song I'm working on where I try to hammer the point home that honestly, if you're really tired of these businesses being closed down, the right thing would be for us to have very early on, like widespread acceptance of these basic policies that would have been able to, or these basic practices in 99.9% of cases, like where I'm not saying that I don't know. I actually like try to fight for nuance so much to the point where I have a hard time making unequivocal statements. Cause like, okay, I guess in very rare cases, a mask can be damaging. Like for a person who needs to lip read or like weird, rare respiratory situations. But like if you had gotten the really widespread adoption that other countries saw that are more equipped to do this kind of thing, like I'm Japanese, right? The Japanese have been putting on one of those masks when you get sick for decades, and if we had had that, well, then we wouldn't have needed to have these stay-at-home orders and these multiple waves and this continual, really just depressing and powerfully dejecting like culture that we've had about feeling like this is never going to end. Because you've seen like that you can see which governors are seeing cases really spike, and then you see Kate Brown taking a lot of flack from the same people she's taken a lot of flack for her whole term. And Oregon has the 48th most cases per 100,000 people. So we're crushing it because we crushed it because we really made that effort.
And still, people that I care about deeply, my good friend of mine from really middle school friend, but through high school as well, both of her parents were hospitalized and her dad is still in the hospital. So even the successes of us taking this serious as a society, we're still losing loved ones or having loved ones come close to, to having to fight for their life. People just don't understand how significant this is. Now, back to the Capitol building breach, though. It's one of those things that we're never going to forget this day. We're going to remember where we were watching this news coverage. What was your experience like during that day?
Oh man, what a great question. Because early on, knowing that there was going to be this big rally and this protest, I was tuning in to some of the live streamed actually from where the House of Representatives was debating this objection to the counting, which, by the way, was supposed to be quite a simple and in many ways symbolic procedure for the federal government located in DC to accept what the states have already certified and sent to them. It's a counting thing. It's like, let's make sure that like they didn't send multiple electors in any given state. And it's just not a real situation where because Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, who is very controversial now for fomenting a lot of the stuff. And there's a picture of him like holding up his fist like to these people who are about to do something violent later in the day. He was basically saying, this is the space where we have to object. No, it's not. There are many different like places in the chain of command where you would be better served by trying to uphold election integrity. The biggest part where you should start is getting your people to vote. And so having a president who doesn't actually actively encourage the election by basically saying that it's just going to be rigged anyway, that's where you really should have started. So my experience was watching them debate it and seeing, your Facebook comments, like being very, like polarized and whatever. And people like, there was like an incoming Republican congresswoman who was like shouting and being really upset about it. And people like, why are you yelling? And I was like, this is like seeming like pretty intense here, but people might not realize that like the federal government has always been a place for very spirited debate within, for the most part, norms. Like there was one guy who got hit with a cane so badly he almost died on the House floor once, but for the most part, like people have just been engaging in really raucous, spirited debate since like the Constitutional Convention, for example, and they didn't have PA systems back then, so people were just literally shouting, so then seeing that, but then starting to see, once they actually were able to get in, and then the really valid questions about why the security was making excuses at times for we had no intelligence that there would be any kind of a breach of the Capitol. And it's like,
that's insanity because like I said, I've seen things and I'm not even in those circles. I mean, all you have to do is I know the FBI has done this, but they're on Parler. So, the fact that reports came out that Mike Pence had to call in the National Guard because Trump refused. I mean, these different things, like it seems a little questionable, and it's not only in the Capitol on Washington, D.C. There was massive protests at multiple state capitals, including Oregon. And, the same week, it may not have been on the same day, but
Georgia, they really so easy to predict. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who did that hour-long phone call with Trump, where Trump said, find 11,000 votes. That guy, they really tried to come after him too. And so,
and death threats and all that. In Oregon, at the state capitol, there was a protest, and Oregon State Representative Mike Neerman, it's been seen. You can see the video clear as day that he opens the door, lets them in, and then just goes about his business, just keeps walking. And it just looks like there's no fear there. And the DC Capitol Police are under serious scrutiny for maybe a combination of things, a lack of preparation. Were they allowing this? I mean, this will be investigated. And what scares me so much of where we're at is that under a Biden administration, even if he's just president and Merrick Garland, who's now attorney general, decides to take up this thing, to take up these cases, there's going to be people on the right that are going to be like, they're trying to punish their political, rivals. And it's like, this is not the same thing. These people, I mean, it's a breach. They're literally breaking federal law, and so I don't know. It's going to be really troublesome.
Because you mentioned Portland earlier and making concessions and thinking about that. Of course, I try to pride myself on being, and I hope people keep me in check. Reach out to me, 541-513-3904. If you hate what I'm saying, reach out to me and tell me that I'm wrong or I'm missing something. But comparing, for example, the summer of tumult and the Black Lives Matter protests and Antifa related uprisings and things to what happened here, right? What's a big difference? And this is something that needs to be made clear for people who don't really see, or for the people who weren't involved in these summer protests, etc. I'm thinking of, like, for example, in Portland, Ted Wheeler was the mayor and everybody in the protest freaking hated him. And in Minneapolis, Jacob Fry was the mayor, and damn near everybody in the protest freaking hated him and was really trying to hold him accountable. And they did show up to one or two of these the peaceful protests that occurred and like engaged and dialogued with the crowd. People marched to Lucy Venus's house here in Eugene, for example, and also Christine Lundberg, who was the mayor at the time in Springfield, and they would dialogue with these people, right? And there's just this perception that gets spread around falsely that because, for example, that these people will say that they believe Black lives matter, like no capitals on the lives and the matter, like these lives are valued as anybody else's lives, right? Because they say these things and because they do position themselves as like trying to be champions of racial justice and social justice, that look what you did, you encouraged these violent actions, right? No, that's not the case. And the crowds themselves are not pro Ted Wheeler crowds, are not pro Minneapolis mayor crowds, right? Whereas there is a giant difference between Donald Trump from the Oval Office telling people January 6th, and then saying, you got to fight, you got to come with strength. Rudy Giuliani saying, combat, all this stuff and drumming up this kind of support. Trial by combat, and that being the president of the U.S. in organizing that against a process of the government, like directly. And then why I say it matters what the people are thinking too. Maybe I am wrong, but when I see that crowd of people all supporting Trump directly, maybe there is 0.001% of people who actually don't support Trump, but they're just there because they care so much about what they believe to be a flaw in election integrity that they're there regardless of whether or not they support Trump. But no, that is largely, it's not, like I said, the BLM thing is not pro Ted Wheeler, but the insurrection in the Capitol is very much pro. We love Trump so much that we will do anything possible to say that he deserves to have a second term, even though 7 million people voted for Biden more than him, and 306 to 232 was the result. And none of these people, there's like an ignorance of how the judiciary system works because of the fact that like damn near every single one of the court cases failed, and often in like trying to dispute double-digit numbers of votes, like very small numbers of votes. People are like, the courts just wouldn't hear them. These are people that your guy appointed. These are people in so many cases that they didn't hear the case because you have to have evidence to get time in front of a freaking, like, you believe in small government. Do you really believe that a judge should take up any case where I could just say, you know what, Patty Rose freaking reached through his laptop and smacked me in the face? You got to provide evidence.
Yeah. No. So, there's two things. So with the Trump situation in DC is that Trump is literally in DC giving a speech on January 6th saying, let's march down there. I'm going to go with you. Let's march down to the Capitol. I mean, he instigated, he started it clear as day. You're talking about Ted Wheeler. There's two things. And I'm not defending or whatnot Ted Wheeler. It doesn't matter the person. But as the mayor, he went to the protests to show solidarity because they were so consistently there every single night that it wasn't going to stop. And he wanted to show states' rights because the federal government was detaining people. So that's when Ted Wheeler went, correct? Ted Wheeler went once the feds were there. It wasn't the state police that tear gassed him, wasn't it federal? I can't remember.
I don't
Regardless,
remember.
so now here's one important thing, though, that when I talk about some
but I do know that he was very opposed to and pointed out the fact that after the feds came in and snatched people into unmarked vehicles, that's when things got worse. Like things got more vitriolic and violent.
Right. And so with Ted Wheeler, though, there was an attack on his house. And this is where I am this is what I'm talking about, is when I say that I have to rethink some of the things. Like, I'm not ever going to be okay with that for anybody. I don't care whose house it is. Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Ted Wheeler. You go to someone's house who is an elected official and you disagree with their strategy, it's not acceptable. Because the only reason that you would have any, in my opinion, any right to go do that is if they had done something so heinous that they probably should be removed from office. You know what and so we have a duty as citizens to elect or to vote someone out. If the next, you have to do that. We have to do this through the democracy or we lose it. So I'm just not accepting.
Can I ask you to elaborate on, for example, the difference between leading a protest of chants outside a person's house and like actually?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
leaving a pig head.
Sure. Everything that I've read with Ted Wheeler's house, though, is that there was a fire started in the foyer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I'm talking actual destruction. What happened with Isaiah Wagner led the protest when he went to Christine Lundberg's house. And I watched the feed. I didn't go because of COVID to any of the protests this summer. That's why. It's because of COVID. But I watched the feed and, I felt like he was doing things where he thought about it, where he said, we're not going to scream and yell. We're going to have a silent march, and I thought these things were really poignant, really powerful and beautiful, to be honest, so there's a difference. I'm not a big fan of people going to people's houses. I'm just not because there's children, there's other things involved that it's like, there needs to be a place where we have peace, and that's our homes. And I'm just not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of, you are an elected official and it's a 24-hour day job, but there's times where you should be able to just have your time, that you should be, I don't care. I mean, that's just my take on it, is that I'm not a big fan of it. I did watch that one and it went as good as it possibly could, but it's just a recipe for disaster when you start going to people's houses, and that's my opinion. But
I mean, I don't know that I fully agree, but I would say like the unfortunate reality of like mob mentality and mob psychology is that, tipping points can lead to like, okay, I think there's an interesting discussion to be had about like, so I would go to an event and support the event, support the goals of the event, and the overall principle of like racial justice, for example. But sometimes I would be there and not say every single chant, because that's me as a person, and those are my words once they start coming out of my mouth. So the vast majority of the chants I would say, but I would be just again, I'm trying to fight for nuance in this way that like, I guess I wish that more people would, but like, I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal. It just feels like the right things that seem like the thing to do that makes sense. And so like, all cops are bastards is one that I probably did say at some point, but I many times I didn't say it because depending on how I felt and how I really felt in that moment, because first of all, just on that phrase, I do think it arises as a refutation to the incorrect notion that like law enforcement issues of corruption, police violence, racism, white supremacy are just tiny isolated incidents. And so they say it's just a few bad apples. Don't blame the whole system. But it's very worth having this systemic critique of the system based on the history and what's still happening today. But do those words, like as a slogan, do I agree with them? Do I think every single cop is a bastard or a bad person? I do not. And so that's just where, but that's why I try to be like, but probably I'm doing a fool's errand to be like, think about the people who like may have been part of a Trump rally, but like were the ones trying to like not have it become violent, or because they're out there, right? I think.
Well, but again, people's right to protest. I'm not. Of course, that's there. I'm talking about at people's house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that, I just have a hard time. I just have a hard time with it on someone's lawn when, you know, who knows?
Well, that's where I would leave if it was doing damage to a person's house. That's where I would like to believe that I would leave. You know?
So we have a lot to cover. So I mean, we could talk about each one of these things forever, you know, and we will in the next 20 years. But we have so much to cover. We have to talk about social media. So this week we've seen finally Trump being banned from Twitter. It sounds like permanently. And then Facebook, Reddit, YouTube. It sounds like he's been blocked from Shopify. So you can't buy his hats and stuff like that, or the Make America Great hats. I'm pretty sure right now Trump is probably signing up for an OnlyFans page because that's the only place that he would be left. You know, Parler, which prides them, so they call themselves the free speech.
Subscribe to me on Patreon. You get lots of rewards for every tier. It's going to be great.
So Parler, which has popped up as they say the last place for free speech. I think they're confused on how the internet works and the First Amendment works in regards to free speech in private companies, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it sounds like Parler is being blocked from the App Store. So unless they're being looked at and reviewed, you have 24 hours to correct some of your dealings with misinformation. What is your take on this? On these shutdowns and blocks of Trump? I mean, I read some of the tweets, and it's clear to me that it's inciting violence, and we saw him incite violence. I guess this just shows how massive these tech giants have gotten and how dangerous it is for our world, you know, and we've seen positives. I mean, I don't know enough to know about the Arab Spring. You remember that whole situation? I don't know enough.
2011.
I mean, that was looked at as being this amazing thing. And I watched a documentary. I'm interrupting your question answer here, but I watched a documentary last night that was Frontline, that was about Maria Ressa from the Philippines. And she's a journalist that is being fought by the government. Now that's censorship, because that's the government arresting a journalist for reporting their views. If you are given a platform, someone decides to give you the platform, they can fire you. You know what I mean? If as a journalist, that's a whole different argument. Facebook can delete your stuff because they don't want it on their private company platform. The government cannot shut you down. You know, that's a whole different thing. And yet Trump tried to block TikTok. And then now you'll have his supporters saying, wait a minute, why is it, you know? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, he tried to come down on American users of TikTok who, you know, live under the First Amendment. So, you know, it's interesting. That's a really interesting question, dog. I really got to say, because the first thing I would say is our conversation about about free speech. I just wish people were a little better equipped to have it in terms of knowing what the First Amendment covers and what it is. Like when you look at the Bill of Rights, like a lot of people will know, like, okay, that one is the one that allows no quartering of soldiers in your house or whatever, but like no one knows the exact words, right? And like somehow we've kind of like accepted that or people don't tend to memorize the exact words. Like First Amendment just means free speech. Well, no. First Amendment also covers right to peaceably assemble and the press. And, you know, I think free speech is like generally something that I agree with, like as the most vague concept possible, right? But honestly, when we're talking about what that amendment covers from a public policy standpoint, like I think Twitter has the free speech right to do something like what they did with Trump, which they warned him in public and said, we're going to basically shut down your account, bro, if you don't like take responsibility for what you've done here. He didn't, of course. And then they shut him down. Like that is an act of speech, and they have the right to curate what content happens in their private company. Now,
also, they're publishing platforms. You know,
of course.
and not to interrupt, but like Amazon, you can self-publish on Amazon. That does not mean that they will let you sell Mein Kampf or, you know, or whatever book, you know, or, I mean, obviously if you want to write a Nazi manifesto, you're not going to be able to sell it on Amazon. You're like, this is troublesome. We're not, you know, and I'm sure that you probably can get away with quite a bit. I've said it very openly on the show that when I'm a First Amendment absolutist, it means that I would actually fight for someone to be able to print racism. like to be able
Right.
to publish it on their own.
Right.
I might with my dollars boycott the publishing company that wants to let them sell that book and has their name on it as well. So if someone wants to write racist material, create their own print shop, make their own books and and publish that stuff, that's protected under the First Amendment. Now, our tax dollar or our dollars can speak, and we can boycott it by not buying it. That's the way that it's supposed to be done. Anyway, go ahead.
And then specifically where I think we would agree it would be bad is you would say is if I think it would be bad regardless, but let's say, okay, insert X here is this race. I hate him and let's go stone his house.
That's different though.
Right. And you're really trying to incite that. Yeah. And yeah. So, it's a really interesting conversation because I have for a while had sympathy for the idea that shutting down of speech has gone too far in many cases. But I mean, that's in large part, it's just culturally people's right to hold accountable the people who are speaking things that they find so egregious that you're willing to try to drum up momentum to stop them.
Yeah. Alex Jones is a good example. So Alex Jones on YouTube was where he makes his money. I mean, where he made the most of it. That and selling some life-changing altering pill that doesn't snake oil. But he has his platform and his website and InfoWars that is massive. He's got a huge following. So I'm sure that at this point, his website, he has web designers behind the scenes that are making it so they can make their own video, upload ability. I'm sure he doesn't use Wix or GoDaddy is what I'm saying, because it's so big. But when he uses YouTube, there's a code of conduct. And what got him into hot water is talking about Sandy Hook, among other things, but talking about the Sandy Hook victims that lost their children, their kindergartners that were shot in the face, that he says it's a false flag and that those people either killed their kids or sacrificed their kids to take your guns, which is absolute insanity. I mean, for people that believe that, take a step back and think about what you're thinking, that this is just insane. And this is why we're at where we're at, because there's people that believe this kind of garbage. Alex Jones has admitted that he was lying, and he calls himself an entertainment person, not a journalist, which I say too. So it's dangerous waters. But anyway,
argument Fox News made once to basically say we're an entertainment platform.
Yeah.
Don't believe that we're gonna say honest information. That was a legal defense they tried to use once.
Right. And so Alex Jones gets pulled from YouTube, and everyone cries censorship. I've got a good friend I won't name that he's constantly on this argument because of the YouTube platform pulling conservatives. And it's I hate it when it looks one-sided. But I mean, I've seen a ton of stuff pulled from the left as well that was inciting violence. Not making false equivalences. I'm just saying they censor a lot of stuff, and that'd be a difficult job. But with Alex Jones specifically, it's so public. Yeah, his stuff needs to be pulled. He's literally he's promoting violence. He's promoting this misinformation campaign that leads to death threats, massive amounts of death threats to these people that are victims of the Sandy Hook shooting. And it's just disgusting. And this is, I mean, I don't
know how much we can really have a great conversation about this, because it is so nuanced, and it's these cases have to be thought about individually and broken down and really considered, right? And I think there's serious issues I have with both sides of this argument. So that's just basically how I would condense it. But one thing that I think is funny on an entertaining level is, have you ever heard anybody complaining about being shadow banned from anything?
Maybe elaborate on it.
So shadow banning is oh, I used to have this many likes on my posts and this many views, and now the platform doesn't like me, and so they've shadow banned me, which suppresses me in the algorithm. My own fans can't see me as much, and blah blah blah. I kind of agreed with that when it was musicians on Facebook being why'd you change the algorithm so now I have to pay to get in front of my own supporters? But the funny thing is, I see people, and I really do see these people. Some of them are my friends, and they're conservative people, and they just are so addicted to this act of posting or whatever. They flood their own profile with all of these posts, right? And they just assume that every time they post, people care so much that once people stop liking and responding and commenting to each post, they cry shadow ban. Yeah. And
They have
That's just
never made music.
such a delusional
Yeah.
a delusional, it can be such a, and I'm not saying it's never happened that people have been shadow banned, but it's a delusional idea that like, oh, me posting more and more and being more extreme means that it'll get more positive attention. It's like, no, your friends get weared down by that, and the amount of time they spent looking at it and engaging shrinks. So I don't know,
Yeah,
homie.
and if you repeat the same things, I mean, obviously, any one of us that's done music can say, I've spent months on an EP or an album, and then, nobody cares. I mean, I make bad music.
Yeah.
You make good music, so, and I'm sure you've still had that happen. No,
I'm gonna start putting out bad music that I'm proud of, because it takes me, it's too much money and effort and time to try to make it sound great, and then it doesn't sound perfect anyway. So like, I'd rather release something where I love the lyrics, but you know what? Maybe I didn't mix this perfectly, but it's going out there.
Yeah.
So check it out.
Yeah.
My album's gonna be called Chicken. I'm excited. I'm very excited.
Nice.
You have an exclusive for the album title of my project that I hope is gonna come. Well, it'd be a little too ambitious to say January, but probably February 2021. Gradient.
Yeah. So everybody, listening, Thomas is also a musician, goes by the name Gradient. Really awesome hip hop artist. Normally I would be playing your songs, but we do have a special treat when we end this episode. I'm going to play an acoustic song that Joey Helpish recorded watching the news on Wednesday. So, like you said, it's really difficult for us to really get into the social media censorship stuff, because it's going to be really rapidly changing over, perceptions and information that's coming out. I think that the misinformation campaigns that have been done, I know we talked about in 2016 Russia and Russia's misinformation campaign. I'm a believer that as much as I might not like the results with what Russia did, if Russia was posting memes that were misleading, is that even a crime? You know what I'm saying? Is Russia's, I'm not defending them. I'm just saying, are they protected under our First Amendment rights as well? Now, there's outside interference and election issues there, but if somebody wants to create all these bullshit memes, it's not a crime. Like in America, like let's say it's not Russia, say it's people here, it's not a crime. And so this is where it gets really difficult, because we as a society have a responsibility to actually know things and to actually educate ourselves, and so
somehow that's such a great statement that should be so obvious.
Seriously, it just feels like, and I mean, there's a lot of things that I don't know,
For anyone who doesn't know, I did do like 15 or 20 episodes of my show as Less Stupid with Thomas Hura. And I was trying to say that I'm becoming less stupid because I am really dumb in many cases, like by having interesting conversations with like people who know better than me. But like also it feels in many cases, I think people receive it as like, you're going to become less stupid by listening to this show because there's a lot of stupidity in the world. And, I changed it to broken class, and I'm excited about that. But like, that's something I care about is like basic veracity of knowledge.
Well, it's like Andrew Yang's pins, math. It's not math. It's make America think again.
Think harder.
Is it harder? Think harder.
Yeah.
I don't know an acronym or how it works, but yeah, make America think harder. And Andrew Yang, by the way, is running for the mayor of New York, and that's happening, right? He announced that. I'm extremely.
I don't think he has announced. However, this is how it works. You leak the info somehow. Basically, like they have filed. He has filed for the necessary,
that is wonderful.
Back end formal procedures to become candidate for mayor of New York City in 2021.
So we're going to have one more topic, and then we're going to get out of here. And this is really difficult. We kind of have just touched on different things, and the censorship stuff I wish we could get more into, but it's a difficult thing. And I really don't even have the answers on how to fix this. And the next topic, we're not really probably going to have the answers either. But what do we do for the 75 million people that supported Trump, voted for Trump? Some are all in for Trump. Now there's a broad swath. I know that there's people that voted for Trump that are disgusted by his behavior that might consider still voting for him now. I think that now, if the election was done today, it wouldn't even be close. The stuff that's happened. I think that the narrative has kind of turned after watching what happened in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. But I mean, there's a lot of people. How do we fight the misinformation? That's the part that we don't even know how to control these platforms. But how do we get people with such extreme different views that think that just because I'm a Democrat that I like eat children, and worship Satan? How do you rein that in? You had mentioned before though too that it's a small amount of people. It's a very small, loud amount of people.
Sure, and it's like it's both. It's big enough to be historic and troubling, but it also is outsized in the attention that it gets. There's a lot we could say about this, my friend. And I think the healing is going to come down to conversations, and I love podcasts for that. Like being able to really I'll watch a podcast with two people I disagree with and find things that I appreciate. And when you've done that, you probably realize that person's not just a mortal enemy, right? I think there's one point that I was dying to make on your show, so I'm going to make it here. There is a delusion that exists with many of these people, the most extreme ones, where they simultaneously believe two things that don't really go together. One, Trump is the most unfairly hated and demonized president, right? Just totally unfairly hated and smeared in the history of the country. Like the media is his enemy, and it's just so unfair what he's gone through. That's one. And they also believe that there's no way he wouldn't win in a landslide. Why? How does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If he didn't win in a landslide, it's because the whole system is just the voting system itself is corrupt. Maybe you could say the media landscape is corrupt. I'd probably agree with you on a lot of those situations. But people voted for the other guy.
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
It's frustrating with real quick. The Democratic Party, like it or not, as a progressive, I don't like it, the way that things went. But that being said, you don't always get what you want, and progression and progress is slow. And so in 2016, there was talks about Hillary stealing the election and all this different stuff from Bernie, and so that had so much damage. In 2020, we're just like, okay, we're going to vote for whoever the hell the people pick, and we're going to make sure that this happens. And it's going to happen no matter what. It could have been Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. It didn't matter who got won the primary. There was going to be a massive turnout, and then there was efforts like Fair Fight and Stacey Abrams, who's the real MVP. But in Georgia, to really get new voters, even more so in the Georgia runoff, that there was new voters in the Georgia runoff in the Democratic Party, so I get where people on the right that are Trump supporters are like, what the hell? How is it possible that you had 81 million votes for Biden and Obama had set records with 68 million? And it's like, first of all, population growth. Second of all, participation, and
I've never seen, Patty, culturally such hatred for 1 year of the Gregorian calendar as I did for 2020.
I thought 16 vastly,
yeah, right. And it vastly transcended just politicos and people who are like me are obsessed with following politics. Like it was, everybody knew that shit needed to change. And fair enough, like the most basic instinct is to want some accountability or blame, let's say, for the person who has been in charge under all of this. Especially when homeboy's just not taking accountability and he's just out golfing and lying. So
one of the things too that never gets thrown into this conversation about the hatred for Trump and the turnout and whatnot is COVID. Is that we're living in a pandemic, and that yes, the way that people voted might have changed in states. We voted by mail forever, but it was then instigated cross country, so it was easier for one. For two, if there's Republican leaders that were saying it was a hoax, starting from the top at Trump, that could potentially kill your family member. So for people that take this serious, when they take COVID serious, which they should, then because it's science, it shouldn't be political. But that for a lot of people, they're like, I'm not safe. And it is the duty of the elected officials to keep us safe. And what we saw Wednesday,
I love too. Yeah. The Georgia runoff, man. Two of the two Republicans that were running for their own seats back that they were already sitting in, right, were two of the most corrupt in terms of the insider trading that occurred from learning about COVID early through their government information, that you're not supposed to use that to enrich yourself, to sell off your stocks so that you can like make sure that, you know, you are fine while downplaying it to the public. So thank God that people of Georgia, with the help of Stacey Abrams and a whole bunch of other people, like understood that really basic premise. While the GOP side of things were divided on a message, they were either trying to just say radical liberal Raphael Warnock 11 times or whatever, or say that the election's rigged and so it's not fair, so vote help out Trump. But like, you know, like again, like here's a conflict of a message. Like, you got people who really like Trump's still going to be inaugurated. He's still going to be in, but they're also making this post-apocalyptic argument that like the only check you'll have on the Biden administration is to like vote for Loeffler and Perdue. And it's like, well, not if Trump's still going to be the president.
But
right?
voting doesn't work. So, you know,
right.
You know,
it was all skewed. It didn't make sense. It wasn't coherent. And the Democrats had a unified, strong message there.
And they had two.
I'll credit them for that. Yeah.
I know you have problems with
I don't love us.
But that's fine. You know, but you know what we're seeing is when those two candidates ran on platform, ran on character, ran on principle. The two candidates, they ran on representation, which again is very important because Warnock is bringing a voice to the table that hasn't been there. You know, but the Republican shtick is running out when it comes to elections because the majority of people are not. They may be registered as a Republican or a Democrat, but the majority of people only do that for the primary. And they're like, I hate both parties, you know, and realistically, I am not a fan of the Democratic Party as a whole. I've got many problems. I'm disgusted that Nancy Pelosi is seated again to be the Speaker of the House. It's time for new leadership. After what we've seen in these last 10 years, it's time for new leadership, but that's a different point. But
let's reward your listener base here who loves the local coverage, right? Kurt Schrader, congressman in Oregon's 5th, who represents Salem and that whole area in the district. He's the most conservative of Oregon's Democrats who go to DC, and he in many cases has voted against things that the vast majority of House Democrats have. For example, in 2019, he was one of 6 House Democrats to vote against a gradual minimum wage increase. He basically said he thinks Pelosi is too liberal, right? And this is a Democrat that Oregon keeps electing. And I believe he needs to be primaried badly by somebody who, and Mark Gamba tried it, and I hope he tries again, and blah, blah, blah. But I really believe that Kurt Schrader should be replaced by somebody who is at least a little more liberal. I know that the Salem area and stuff isn't the most ardently progressive, but he said on a conference call, he compared the idea of impeaching Trump to lynching, right?
Which is already tone deaf, you know, and you know what.
And thank God that the other congressmen like DeFazio, Bonamici, that are Oregon congresspeople, freaking did not mince words and said that is beyond the pale, very bad. He apologized quickly because he knew that was a stupid thing for that information to come out, that he said that. And now what does he do? He's supporting impeachment.
Well, that's
what exactly, a politician.
That's what I'm talking about, though, is the politics of it, where the campaigns are literally just politics. It's just that person's terrible, and that's the only thing. When you got progressives are about platform, policies, plans. You know, this is what we're going to do. And that is attractive to people, sometimes even people that might differ with the letter next to their name. You know, you talk about a 2016 Bernie Sanders run that got popular with libertarians, which is insanity. I mean, a small amount, sure, but enough that you're bringing people to this umbrella. You know, I mean, even
his policies are not libertarian.
No, but people are like, I want a cost effectiveness because a libertarian balances their checkbook. They want the government to do the same. You know, so they're like, if we're going to do healthcare, and the Koch brothers did this thing that they found results that said that it was more cost effective than our current system, then a libertarian's like, I hate it because, you know what I mean? But maybe it's better because it's more cost effective. I mean, in a perfect world, the libertarians would be like, we don't even have insurance. We just pay our bills when we go. But that's just not possible for the majority of Americans because we've been squashed by corporations, you know? So
can I throw a question at you just about
absolutely
the practicality?
Never going to get out of here. Yeah.
Yeah. The consequences of what is Trump going to really face for the fact that he incited this, right? There are 4 ways that he could leave office. 1, he resigns. pie in the sky, man. The only way he would resign is if he took a crazy deal with Pence where Pence is going to pardon him if he resigns. 2, the 25th Amendment happens and they invoke that and they remove him through that means. 3, he has an impeachment that leads to a conviction in the Senate. And 4, Joe Biden is inaugurated and we can only have one president at a time. So he actually finishes out his whole term. What do you think is going to happen and what do you want to happen?
In a way, this won't happen, but in a way, I would be okay on a federal level with a resignation and a pardon, because I think that it would be even after everything, and a lot of people can disagree. And my answer would probably change depending on the time of the day and how much anger I've got stewing. But I would be okay with the healing process beginning. State level with New York, they can still try him on tax fraud and all that stuff. I'm not worried about it. But on the feds, let's just move on and make this a week for the history books behind us. You know, it's kind of one. I think that we're not a country that punishes our political rivals because of political beliefs. And even though Trump has crossed and he's destroyed those lines and destroyed norms, it's just time to move on. It's time to heal. That's one I would be okay with that. You know, I don't know if it's my preference. It would be good to see that we could just move on and an actual peaceful transition of power. And that's how much he's fought to make it to where you're accepting something so normal that it's just a give. You thought it was a given before. You know what I mean? So
I really hope briefly that enough people on the right are listening to Joe Biden enough to know that that's his position. He shares your position.
Yeah.
He's focused on working on his government, making his government and his agenda function, and not focused on impeachment.
What do I expect to happen? If and I don't know if that was the question, but what do I expect to happen is all 50 states' capitals on January 20th are going to be desecrated, destroyed, probably with gun violence, and there's going to be thousands of people die, is what I expect to happen on January 20th.
Wow.
Flat out. That I think across
I don't expect thousands, but it's really hard to say. And
no, I think that there's people that believe that this is the last, it's going to be a mutiny, that they think that
the last tweet that 45 was able to put on Twitter was him saying he's not going to go to the inauguration. And some have speculated, I don't know if I agree, that he's basically saying that to say, hey, I'm not going to be there. You guys have at it.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't know if that's like a bomb situation or like
there was bombs found. Whatever. I mean, I've read reports.
A truck of 11 bombs from Alabama, like a whole bunch of stuff. And we didn't even talk about like how some of the shirts, man, they were saying 6 million Jews wasn't enough.
Right.
Like Camp Auschwitz, like
there was a bombing last week. I mean, and remember the truck that was going down the street? God, what state was it? Was it North Carolina? I can't remember what state it was. Not right now.
Louisville.
Okay, Kentucky. And I mean, it was so just
totally out of the news now.
I know, so bizarre. I mean, here's a truck going down the road that's like, please evacuate the area. Bomb will be detonated. Was that a test run? You know, I mean, I'm old enough to know. I know some of my audience might not be. I remember watching thoroughly the coverage of the Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy McVeigh, and you know, a lot of young people don't understand.
Which Merrick Garland helped prosecute, by the way.
Oh, nice, yeah, and he will be attorney general. So I'm just saying, I'm no stranger when it comes to far right extremism. Living in Oregon, we live right next to Idaho, which is just an absolute hotbed for this anti-establishment extremism, libertarianism. And I'm not saying
nationalism.
I'm not saying that libertarians are a problem. They're absolutely not. It's just a difference in strategy. But when taken to a far extreme, the level that people are willing to go to defend their freedoms, which I think it's important. It's crucial, you know, it's what our country is based on. But people will use things like having to wear a mask, going against their constitutional rights. You get into these really murky areas where it's like, come on, we can't even agree on. You're talking like your hair's on fire because you can't go into a freaking Costco without a piece of cloth on your face to make sure that other people aren't dying. You know what I mean? So I mean, we've covered enough. I'm tired.
Yeah.
No. Thomas, you're amazing.
I would love to have you on my show sometime soon. So please, people, just look forward to that for Broken Class. We'll have more to talk about. And, you know, it'd be an honor to have you on because I haven't had you on yet.
Yeah. Broken Radio or Broken Class. Broken Radio. Shout out to Broken Radio 541. That's Nate Ingman's podcast.
Shout out to Guerrilla Radio by Rage Against the Machine. Shout out to Broken Record, which is Rick Rubin's podcast. Shout out to any combination of these words we've already said.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love it. Yeah. Shout out to yeah, I'm done. I've got nothing left. My brain's mush.
Shout out to FM Radio, which was created on the Columbia University campus in the early 2000s.
On a serious note, shout out to my sponsors, Oregon Cash Flow Pro. Oregon Cash Flow Pro is my title sponsor. Their slogan is, I got it right here, is more wealth, less debt, fast. So go to OregonCashflowPro.com to get money management advice for free. And then I've got if you'd like to sponsor the show, you can go to strpod.com/sponsors and make a one-time or monthly donation of any amount. If you want to donate $2 a month, I would love that. I appreciate everybody for listening. We're going to end this with an acoustic song that my good buddy Joey Helpish made just watching the news. He's such an eclectic, amazing artist that he basically has recorded 10 million songs. He picks up his guitar it's part of his hands. And he I thought it was really beautiful. Normally I would play your music. So I want to give a shout out to you, Gradient, and check out your music on Spotify and everywhere else. And
the Ambition album is the only one on there that's actually my album.
It's good stuff.
There's a few other gradients. Thanks. I'll let you introduce this beautiful song that you love. The last thing I just want to say, shout out to Radio Shack. R.I.P.
Yeah, dude. That's sad. Anyway, we're going to get out of here. Thomas Hira, thank you very much. I can never say your name right. It's something that I'm close.
Hira.
Thomas Hira, you're always awesome. So we're going to end this with a song. This is an acoustic song by Joey Helpish.
They breached the Capitol today. Things didn't go their way. Patriotic, angry screams. Murder. I'm so confused like my nation. I'm so conflicted like my nation. I'm so angry like my nation. I'm so broken like my nation. They breached the Capitol today. Things didn't go their way. Patriotic, angry screams. Murder and American dreams. They breached the Capitol today.